Welcome everybody to the last day of the inaugural Global Encounters Symposium. It's been fantastic so far, and I have no doubt that our sessions this afternoon into the early evening are going to be equally wonderful. I'm speaking to you today from the unceded lands of Naarm, also known as Melbourne, and it's been the home since time immemorial to the Kulin Nations, the Woiwurrung, Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and we definitely give thanks to all the support that the community has given us over many years, and really the important role that they've played in the sorts of work that we do here. So it's an absolute thrill. The first people I'm going to introduce you to are Shona Coyne, who's an Indigenous cultural practitioner from the National Museum of Australia. And I'm just thrilled about this. And then we've also got Tiffany Shellam, who's a good friend of ours, and delighted that she could join us today, particularly with Shona. And they are going to talk to us about entangled fish. So I'm going to hand over to, I think, Tiff, you said you'd kick it off. So I'll hand over to Tiff.
I think actually Shona's going
to kick it off. Sorry, my mistake.
I am. Thank you, everybody. It's really lovely to see you all here, albeit virtually. I'm going to kick off today's program, and we're going to be talking a lot about our new project that we're doing, Fish Encounters in Entangled Knowledges rather than Entangled Fishes on Menang Country. So I'll just start our presentation. Oh, bear with me just 1 second. Oh no. Have I got it? No. I think I've used the wrong screen. I apologise. Is that okay?
We can see it now.
Just the slideshow.
Sure. Hang on. I'm sorry, I did practice this earlier and I have now messed it up. Is this okay? Can everybody see this?
Yes.
We can, but it means we can see your notes as well.
Oh, gosh. Hang on.
Would you like me to do it, Shona? And you can just say next slide?
Yes, please. That would be really great. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good.
It's all part of the story. It's all part of the story. Yeah.
And have I stopped sharing my screen?
Yes. Yes, you have.
Okay. So let me start again. My name is Shona Coyne, and I'm a Menang Nyungar Aboriginal woman from Albany in the southwest of Western Australia. Slide 2, please. I'm presenting this from the lands of the Ngunnawal, Ngunnawal and Ngambri people in Canberra. But my cultural connections extend up to Yamatji Country in the Gascoyne region, right across to the east to Wongai Country, and more globally to the Scottish Highlands through my mother's country. I am really quite truly and wonderfully part of a global family. Slide 3, please. Today, along with my really wonderful colleague, Professor Tiffany Shellam, we will be sharing with you some background into a really special program that's quite close to my heart and home. In today's session, the collection and stories of the encounters which we will talk about took place on or originate from Menang Country, my country. Next slide. Albany, or Kinjaling, as we say in Noongar language, means place of plenty. Next slide, please. This place has always been not only a home for Menang people, but also it's always been a really important meeting place with an abundance of rivers, fresh water holes, beautiful sheltered bays, gorgeous beaches, fishes and animals. It's a natural food bowl, and during the warmer weather, many Noongars, which is the clan name for Aboriginal people of the southwest, travelled from further inland to enjoy its really cooler coastal abundance. Next slide, please. Menang people also have a long history of global encounters with a wide variety of outsiders, beginning at least in 1791, when Captain George Vancouver first visited King George Sound. His visit put the vast harbour on the European map and was then followed by others who took advantage of the good wood and watering places and encounters with the welcoming and curious Menang people, my ancestors, who were really eager to exchange with the crew from the visiting ships. One lucrative exchange took place on board the Explorer, Philip Parker King's cutter, in 1821. Next slide, please. During which 100 spears, 150 knives, 40 hammers, 30 spear throwers were exchanged for 240 of the highly sought after ship's biscuit. Next slide, please. Encounters and exchanges between Menang visitors to their country continued when our country began to be colonised in 1826 at the site of the town now known as Albany. Growing up as a kid, it's pretty much impossible to not be aware of the really long history of visitors and the connections that were formed along the way. In my very first exhibition, Yuman Mokia Mia Buja, returning to Moke's country, next slide please, this small exhibition sought to retell the story of a local Aboriginal man, Macari, and his encounters with government resident Alexander Colley in 1831. But there was so much more to this story than just a brief encounter. And here, through Alexander's diary archives and the cultural material that he collected during his time in Albany, next slide please, we were able to reveal so much more about the way these encounters manifested into a sustained and quite a complicated relationship that extended both of their knowledge, language, and really a cultural understanding of each other and country. Next slide, please. So much so that a number of the codgers and tarps, that's the language name for axes and knives, were gifted to Colley through their friendship. Macari was quoted as being an extraordinarily talented in picking up the English language easily. This incredibly unique relationship was clearly significant to Colley, that his brother even named his home in Aberdeen Morku House, and Colley, on his sort of final deathbed, next slide please, asked to be buried alongside his highly regarded companion. Next slide, please. My interest in the intersections of First Nation encounters with global visitors was pretty much ignited after this. And it really led me on to, you know, a beautiful career and to Canberra, actually, where I embarked on a 3-year project that explored the story of the HMS Endeavour voyage captained by James Cook. But this time it was really from an Indigenous perspective. Next slide, please. Working with over 9 different First Nation community groups right up the entire length of the eastern seaboard of Australia was, I have to say, pretty challenging and compellingly pushed out the way the old stereotype of Cook the Discoverer was being previously used. Using this cultural lens, next slide please, on such an old story, we began to deep dive into the truth-telling of Australia's history, which resulted in a major exhibition called Endeavour Voyage, the untold story of Cook and the first Australians. Some of you may have managed to catch a short video piece played during the breakout times of this conference. I'm not sure if it was today or earlier or maybe later.
It was on the Monday.
Oh, excellent, great. But being able to co-curate and research alongside community, next slide please, on these kinds of encounters have been deeply rewarding, and I'm proud to have played a small part in addressing the missing Indigenous perspective of this really incredibly and nationally important story. Next slide please. Actually, you can click it on twice for me, please.
Yep.
Thank you. And again, As an extension of the work I did through Yeoman, I also went to visit the National Museum of Scotland. Next slide, please. With Senior Indigenous Curator at the British Museum, Gay Sculthorpe, and archaeologist and research professor, Alistair Patterson, who I believe is here with us today, to view the Robert Neill ethnographic collection. Next slide, please. This really was the beginnings of a new project for me in particular, that would see me directly researching cultural material collections made by Robert Neill in 1841, related to encounters with my Menang ancestors from Albany. Next slide, please. You can see in this image not only a small collection of cultural material taken from Australia, but more importantly, look how happy I am. As a First Nations researcher, being able to explore and reinterpret collections held in overseas collections is good for me professionally, but even more so and importantly, culturally. To know my Menang story, to understand my ancestors and the relationships they were having at that time, to be involved in the interpretation of Menang collections, and to see beautiful tools and craftsworks all helps me to build my well-being and culturally strong as an Aboriginal woman. Next slide, please, and over to my colleague, Tiffany.
Thanks so much, Shona. It's really great. And I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So it was on a similar trip to Shona's to England, where I had my discovery with this Robert Neill collection. So I was actually on study leave at the British Museum researching collections from Western Australia in 2018. And I knew that Robert Neill, a Scottish-born commissariat officer living in Albany, had made a portfolio of sketches of fish in Albany in 1841, on which he recorded the names given to the fish by Menang Nyungar people. Next slide, please. The portfolio, this portfolio is held by the Natural History Museum in London, where I also located a letter with manuscript notes about each fish. And when I viewed these manuscript notes and sketches up close, I noticed that fish scales were glued onto some of the sketches. And you can see one here below that red fish on the right-hand side. And some of the scales were also stuck onto the manuscript notes as well. I wondered, did Neill preserve the actual fish as well as sketch them? Perhaps some fish were sent to his hometown of Edinburgh, where I knew Shona had already seen the Menang ethnographic collection that he made. So when I spoke to National Museum Scotland, their database showed 2 dried specimens from Neill, and they said they would do some further digging for me. I caught the train to Edinburgh, and when I got to the zoological storeroom, the curator and I couldn't believe the extent of their collection. Next slide, please. There were 27 boxes containing dried fish specimens that Neill had brought to the museum in 1848. Next slide, please. But the collection was even bigger than that. On further inquiry, the curator located 3 marsupials and a reptile skin. Next slide, please. In January and March 1849, more boxes had arrived at the museum from Menang Country from Neill. 12 crustacea, 2 throwing sticks, 3 arrows, a tortoise, 3 boomerangs, 3 needles, 2 hammers, 2 waist ornaments, 1 head ornament, 4 spears, 1 axe and 1 boomerang. The curator of Oceania, Dr. Ali Clark, has now located another box of material that Neill sent from Tasmania in 1823, where he worked in the commissariat before relocating to Albany. This Tasmanian box includes quadruped skins, birds, dried plants, pebbles, insects, snakes, a pelican, and Aboriginal human remains. Currently, these dispersed collections are not linked across the departments of zoology and world cultures in the National Museum of Scotland, or through museum databases, nor to the portfolio of sketches in London, and they are disconnected from the Menang community whose knowledge they capture. This disciplinary and institutional dislocation of artefacts of Neill's original compilation is a legacy of Eurocentric imperial collecting and museum cataloguing practices, continuing to fragment rather than preserve the relationships between the natural world, tangible objects, and intangible cultural knowledge. Next slide, please. As you can see here, the Menang names for fish are recorded on the labels in the National Museum of Scotland, on the actual specimens, and on the sketches of the fish done by Neill, which are held in the Natural History Museum, where he also records the divergent names given to the fish by Menang fishermen, Albany settlers, and sealers, who were also part of a mobile multicultural workforce operating with Indigenous Tasmanians in the Southern Ocean frontier. Therefore, this collection most likely also includes Indigenous Tasmanian fish knowledge. And while this is certainly more than a fish collection, we've only just begun working through these newer items that have been uncovered. And so we're really much more knowledgeable at this stage about the history of the fish collection. So the fish were collected and preserved, but not caught by Robert Neill. Next slide, please. Several of the fish were caught by Menang Nyungar men, and their spear holes are evident on some of the specimens. And you can see here that one of the spear holes that has been sewn up in the preservation process, and this fish was speared by a man called Muriani in May 1841. In the commissariat, Neill was in charge of the colonial food supply, and he issued bi-monthly rations to the Menang, whom he came to know in this way, and through fishing, talking, and working with them. Menang men and women took a key role in the process of catching, preserving, and describing the fish to Neill. They told him about the fish habitat and habits, whether they were good eating, how they were valued by their countrymen and women, and any spiritual or cultural ideas they attached to the fish. And this information was all written down by Neill. So a little bit about Neill. He migrated from Edinburgh to Tasmania with his family in 1820 and quickly secured employment in the commissariat in Hobart. He was then dispatched to Albany through the commissariat office in 1839 with his young family, where he met the Menang. Neill was a keen artist and collector, and he made several sketches of Palawa people in Tasmania, including one of Truganini, which hasn't been located. And he also sketched people, Menang people in Albany. Neill's encounters with Indigenous people in both locations inspired him to record their knowledge, but he was also inspired by encounters that occurred through his employment in the commissariat, an imperial post which supplied explorers with food and equipment for their expeditions, and which meant he came into contact with English, French, and other travellers who moved through the busy ports of Albany and Hobart. And these men, mostly men, almost always men, were also mapping, exploring, collecting, and sketching. So I think these encounters also influenced Neill. In Albany, Neill began collecting fish in 1841, at the same time that explorer Edward John Eyre, led by the Menang guide Wiley, arrived in Albany. Next slide, please. Neill captured their arrival scene in Albany and a portrait of Wiley, both of which were printed in Eyre's journals, with several other sketches that he made of Menang life. In his letters, he modestly suggests that his fish collection began because, and I quote, "Now and then a leisure moment was afforded from official duties, and I thought it would be useful as well as amusing to collect and make drawings of the fish about King George's Sound." In truth, he was a keen amateur natural historian and had a famous naturalist cousin in Edinburgh, Patrick Neill, who had an extensive network that Robert Neill drew on. In one letter to his sister, Neill also noted his reliance on Menang people and the success of his collections, writing, and I quote, "When hutted on the seashores, they spear fish in large quantities. Many of my curious fish were speared by the Aborigines, which I could not obtain without them." Next slide, please. Neill also met the Victorian ethnographer Robert Brow-Smythe when he visited Albany in 1846, and Philip Chauncey, assistant surveyor and amateur ethnographer. And Chauncey sketched Menang portraits, including Wiley, and collected language lists and ethnographic information, perhaps inspiring this in Neill. Next slide, please. Some of Neill's sketches, such as these two here, were published in Brow-Smythe's book, The Aborigines of Victoria. Neill's idea behind drawing the fish, which he did in the evenings directly following the catch, was to preserve their colour before they faded. At the suggestion of George Gray in 1845, the portfolio of sketches was sent to the British Museum, where John Edward Gray, who was in charge of zoology, he studied the drawings. The fish specimens, however, would remain with Neill until he departed Albany, travelling home with him to Edinburgh in 1848. And this really was how the collection was originally split up. So once I realised how rich the collection was in terms of Menang cardigan or Menang knowledge, I called Shona and she put me in touch with her dad, Mr. Lester Coyne, a Menang elder, and a lovely man. And sitting at Lester's kitchen table back in Albany, we went through all the photos of the fish specimens and archival notes that I'd taken. We went through them together, and we decided that what we really needed was a collaborative cross-cultural project that had at its heart the interests of Menang families. Shona and Lester's passion and vision for this project were absolutely infectious. And I also understood the immense significance of the Menang knowledge hidden in this collection for nearly 100 years. As Lester said, discovering this collection is like discovering that the world is not flat. Next slide, please. As a result of these conversations, we set up a collaborative project governed by the Albany Heritage Reference Group Aboriginal Corporation. Next slide, please. Which includes a really great and fun interdisciplinary team of Indigenous and non-Indigenous museum curators, ichthyologists, fish scientists, and historians. And we aim to unpack this collection together.
Now, thank you, Tiffany. So a preliminary workshop on country in 2019, where we worked through digital copies of the collection with Menang elders, revealed the descriptive naming practice applied to the fish in the collection. Next slide, please. Elder Lynette Knapp explained, for example, that the name of the fish, tabadak, next slide, please, refers to the sharp point on the head of the fish, like a tarp, which is the Menang name for knife. And you can see a couple of them on the right-hand side here. This knowledge was also recorded by colonist observers, such as the George Fletcher Moore in his vocabulary published in 1842. Next slide, please. Kojadak, or snapper, was also named in relation to Menang weapons. In this instance, the axe or koj, which relates again to the fish's distinct head shape. Other examples reveal that even though Menang may not have actually seen a particular fish before, they always had a name for it, which often related to their material culture, with many named in relation to the shape or effect of their tools or weapons. Sitting together in Albany, we were all, really quite moved to realise the structure of this Menang descriptive taxonomy. Menang cultural experts continue to possess rich knowledge about these fish, their ecosystems, cultural associations with fish and fishing. At these workshops, we saw the potential of working across knowledges as a process to destabilise the current framework of so-called natural history collections. Next slide, please. Other information that Neill felt was important to record included the different names of the fish. Here he wrote, "In naming the fish, I have merely attempted to give the Aboriginal and popular names known to the sealers and settlers. In obtaining the former, no little difficulty has been experienced. The younger natives generally give different names to those of the elders, but finding the fish named by the latter more descriptive, I have, of course, in most instances, adopted those." Now, this layering of Menang knowledge is really evident on the sketches themselves. For example, next slide, please. This, oops, sorry, next slide.
One. The one.
Sorry, yeah.
This sketch is given two Menang names. The first most likely to be the name given by Neill by younger men, Kijadak, and the second name, Bibble, he records as since ascertained, suggesting that this is the name given by the older men and the one Neill believed to be more accurate. He wrote that older men were more minute in species. The younger often call very different fish by the same name. While Neill discounts the significance of the Indigenous names in his notes as being only useful to enable the collector to obtain any particular species hereafter, these names are given precedence over the settlers and sealers' names, and each fish specimen in Edinburgh continues to retain the Menang names on the labels, which are attached directly to the fish, while the name given by the settlers and sealers are not included on the fish labels, which I think is pretty incredible. Many of Neill's Menang informants were named in his notes. Tulugwitali, for example, was involved in the sketching process as well as the procuring of fish. Neill sketched the fish, and then Tulugwitali looked over his collection to assist in the naming. Neill described this man as one of the oldest and most friendly men we have of the King George tribe. It is likely that it is his knowledge as an elder that is added to the sketches to correct, but not delete, the younger men's knowledge. The fish specimens are hollow skins, and initially we assumed that they were preserved by skinning the fish and then filling the back of the fish to dry in local sand. Next slide, please. Here you can see the remnants of sand on the back of the specimens, and from the front of the fish look whole rather than hollow. However, during the workshops with elders, using sand to get a grip on the slippery internal fish organs and to clear it and to clean out all of the guts. They believe the Menang may have shared this process with Neill in 1841. The Menang families will work with the National Museum of Scotland preservationist George Hankey to create this dormant Menang practice of fish cleaning and explore Menang's involvement in Neill's preservation of the fish. Menang spear holes are evident on some of the specimens. And here you can actually see Moriani's spear hole has actually been sewed up in the preservation process. It's right in the middle there, that little stitching in the middle. Our workshops also revealed a diversity of knowledge and experiences across Menang families. Lynette Knapp had been told by another Menang family member for all of her life that she used the wrong name for shark. She was absolutely amazed and thrilled to read the word marchet on Neill's sketch of a shark, affirming that her father's stories about sharks that were passed down to her. We've later found that when Daisy Bates had interviewed Lynette's grandfather, he also gave the name marchet for shark. Next slide, please. So how can such significant Menang knowledge, hidden under the framework of natural history, be restored, and how might that work look in a museum today? There are real tensions surrounding the realignment of nature and culture in the museum today, with risks of redeploying tropes of Indigenous people as of nature. Reframing this tension is really a key part of our research design. We ask, how can Indigenous knowledge reculture natural science collections? New work in this field in Australia and the Pacific has brought Indigenous communities into the museum as a way of melding Indigenous knowledges with Western science. Our project really aims to do that too, but to also bring the museum onto Menang Buja, or as we say, country, to take part in on-country fieldwork, to ensure curators in the UK understand and connect with the relationships between the collection and Menang country, and the context of the coastal encounters in which the collections were made. Our team will spend time with the Menang community, which will be such a pleasure, particularly for me to do, and to reconnect with family members. Just walking on Budja country, recording fishing and burley sites and stories, researching fish trap stories, as you can see in this image here, which is a beautiful fish trap at Oyster Harbour, and also Calgon Hall and other key locations. The fish curators will conduct marine fieldwork with the Menang families to catch voucher specimens of the fish in the Neill collection. And I particularly find this part really exciting, being, my dad and I often, as a child went spearfishing in these very same waters. So it'd be nice to start doing that again. Menang fisher people and the fish curators will fish with lines and tide pool methods, encouraging two-way skills transfer with knowledge of new and old ways of catching and collecting, and creating new fish collections. So, guided by the interests of the Menang families, we will work to firstly undertake research to make visible the entanglement of knowledges within the Neill collection, the Enlightenment science, Menang knowledge and colonial histories, before adjusting this framework with Menang Karajan knowledge, contemporary science and revisionist and custodial historical approaches. On Menang country, we will literally recontextualise the collection in order to return this knowledge. We will practice and practice language and understand that it holds great significance and importance to Menang people today. Some of the workshops with families will ensure that there's really a good, appropriate understanding of the collection, and that Menang interpretation will be fed back into the museum databases. So there's a two-way process that's happening all across this project. The governance by the local Aboriginal Heritage Corporation will ensure that researchers are guided by Nyungar or Menang ethical protocols, enable informed community discussion about the collection and the knowledge it captures, and ensures the rights to privacy over family information. Our project follows the protocols of other language projects that are led and governed by Nyungar people. Williman Nyungar novelist Kim Scott has reflected on the ways in which language workshops with families and elders can really value add to the traditional archives and unsettle the surety of them. He writes of recent workshops on his country. Details were added to the archival documents, memories shared. We sounded the words, felt for the link between the print and sound ourselves, where it felt right and where it felt wrong. This value adding came from a rare co-location of archive and oral history. Our workshops, a lot like Scott's, aim to reinsert stories into the landscape as a way of transferring power back. Scott writes that his work was motivated by a conviction that this heritage of stories and language is important, all the more so when it occurs in their place of origin and with the attention of a home community of descendants. Another Nyungar elder, Daryl Kicken, has spoken with reverence about the natural history specimens, such as these fish, which recorded his people's words. They are coming back to Nyungar people today like message sticks from ancestors. The workshops are the main focus of the project, and we really hope that they will enable Menang people to unpack the divergent generational knowledge that is captured in this collection, knowledge that was transmitted in initial stages when Neill was on Menang country in the 1840s, and will be transmitted again today through appropriate knowledge protocols. Our major output will be on digitally reassembling this collection to enable wide community, public and museum engagement with the new knowledge produced and shared curatorial and ethnographic authority. The digital platform will unify the dispersed collection, linking it digitally across departments in the National Museum of Scotland and to the National Historic Museum in London. Menang families will continue to add their stories to the platform going forward. So there's a wonderful legacy as part of this project as well. This is really a unique collection with huge potential for Menang family knowledge, as well as critical, historical and scientific understanding of cross-cultural encounters and fish habits and habitats across diverse epistemologies. The collection was made because of Neill's curiosity in Menang life, and significantly, Menang's generosity in sharing knowledge, stories, and food. So I hope you've enjoyed that small taster of our project, and we certainly would like to welcome any questions anybody has in relation to the project or comments they have. I'd like to open it to the floor.
Thank you so much, Shona. Thank you, Tiff. That was terrific. What beautiful material too. I mean, some of those illustrations, aren't they just breathtaking? Beautiful.
They're lovely, aren't they? And
really
there's so
gorgeous.
many of them to explore.
Yeah, fabulous stuff.
Should I stop sharing the screen?
That'd be great. That'd be great. Thanks, David. Look, I'm very open. Everybody wants to ask any questions. I'm just pop them in the chat, or indeed put your hand up, because that works well too. I think, there was so much in there. One of the things I'm really I love the idea of value adding. I mean, it's been the thing that I've certainly in the work that I've done as well really emphasised that no one's trying to take away; they're actually trying to add. And I guess we've come a long way, because that never used to be. I mean, certainly the archives, the museums used to be really anxious about people coming in and saying, you know, we've got things to say about this. What's the reception been like? It sounds to me like the National Museum of Scotland has been incredibly welcoming.
Absolutely. I think their appetite for engagement with source communities has been really welcoming and encouraging. And I think that really it also stems from the incredible relationships that people like Tiffany Shellam and Al Patterson already have established, these kind of relationships as well in advance. And I think that helps when source communities are coming along as part of that. You can see so many case studies now about First Nations people working closely with overseas collections, and the new life that they can really breathe into these collections is incredible and exciting. And who wouldn't want that? Absolutely.
Ariana Lambridis has asked the question of whether or not there's a likelihood that they want that material repatriated. Is that something that the community is talking about?
Do you know what? We actually haven't discussed that yet. First things first is really actually disseminating this information to the community for them to really explore what's in there, and then make a decision about how we kind of want to share that information if we do or if we don't, and then we would then think about what are the next stages. So we haven't got to that bit yet.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we're kind of focusing on the repatriation of knowledge, I guess, as the first step, aren't we? And then thinking about what might happen later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's that's in my opinion, that's often more important than anything. Fish skins are fish skins, but what those fish skins represent and the extraordinary, beautiful, that wonderful material that's inside those accession cards is so powerful. Sian has her hand up. just before I turn to you, Shona, I'm just going to note that Ian McNiven has just mentioned that the project reminds him of Alfred Haddon, who went to Torres Strait as a zoologist to collect marine animals, and then went on to become essentially an anthropologist. In fact, that was what he decided to change his career, being exposed to Torres Strait Islanders' intimate knowledge.
Yeah,
Sian.
Yeah, thanks to you both so much. This was a really fascinating presentation. I'm just absolutely taken with those images of the beautiful paintings of the fish. It's a remarkable, I think in our time now, a fascinating collection. I mean, I want to echo what many people have said about repatriation. There's been a very interesting discussion by my colleague Sheila Mbembe and others about repatriating African artworks from places like the British Museum. But I think this project adds a very interesting angle to that discussion, because there's a certain kind of, you made this artwork and therefore it is yours and it should be repatriated to you. But these are kind of objects of the natural world, and so they kind of they bring up different questions of ownership, I think, which would be very interesting in relation to the kind of artwork repatriation discussion. That was one thought. So I have several thoughts. One was just a quick question. Well, in relation to that, I do think that the fish, what they rather than kind of a wood natural object which is carved and then made into an artwork, they do seem to suggest an archive of skill, so that the fish suggest an archive of fishing. And when these fish are spearfished, is it diving spearfishing or from the shore or the rocks?
Well, I think that one of the last images we had in the presentation, there's actually a stone fish trap. So it was a round shoreline fish trap where the fish, it's a tidal area. So the fish were able to come in, and obviously when the tide went out, they were sort of trapped in this circular area. But this wasn't the only place that they were collecting the fish. So from what I understand, that was a good source of fish, but they were fishing from other areas, and I would imagine it was mainly spear fishing or river fishing. Yeah,
there's just been really interesting recovered archives of, for instance, West African communities having very long practices of diving as part of either spearfishing or other kinds of retrieval, which there's the fish trapping, the spearfishing from shore, but there's all these different aspects of embodied skill that perhaps the archive points to.
Absolutely, and I would love to think that we were diving, being just that, as I mentioned in the presentation, my family are notorious spearfishers. We've been spearfishing in the Albany region for so many years, despite all the sharks and all the other crazy things that you see under there. But to me personally, it feels like that would be a natural process, but I haven't seen any archival evidence or other written knowledge about diving for fish.
That would be fascinating. I would obviously be very interested in myself. Can I make one more point? Sorry,
Lynette. Sure. Then I've got a question from Himanshu.
I was just actually yesterday at a conference where I was reminded about the Yagan people of Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego, southern tip of South America, who they're largely no longer with us, but there was an early explorer who went and created a bird book, so using Yagan names for birds, which is a lovely kind of counterpoint in that other kind of southern location. And friends of mine have just published an article about decolonizing science. And it seems like that's one of the things that this is doing, saying, you know, there are other names for these creatures. So they also used the example of bird names, taking all the names and how many of the Latin names are really just kind of versions of white men's surnames, and suggesting alternative Latin names for species as a way of, as just an example of a way of decolonizing science. So this problematic association that you mentioned of Indigenous peoples with nature, I think possibly can be reframed. You know, Paul Gilroy and others are doing this, reframing that association as in fact positive and necessary in a kind of fast environmentally changing world. So that was just a comment.
Great comments, thank you very much.
I'm just going to read out Himanshu Prabharay's question now. Thank you for the presentation. The question comes from a historian's perspective. Surely both fish species, naming and practices have changed over time. How does one factor in dynamic practices in static museum collections? I don't know if you have an answer for that.
That's a good question. I don't know if I've got an answer for that. It is interesting, when the scientific classification of these fish was made by John Richardson, an ichthyologist who was at the Haslar Hospital in Portsmouth in 1845, he retained the Menang name for one of the fish, the parrel, and retained that in the scientific classification, which is quite a rare process of naming at that time, to include an Indigenous name. But we haven't really done a kind of a longitudinal study of naming practices within the museum context. So that is something that the fish curator, the ichthyologist, Dr. Glenn Moore, will be doing more work on. And yes, as Shona and I would both probably admit, we're sort of very new to the fish process, but learning a lot on the way.
So it's a lovely opportunity to do that kind of really deep interdisciplinary work, and to unite, sort of, you know, for want of a better term, the humanities and social sciences with the sciences. I think that's fantastic. Leonie's just made a point here in the chat, which my ears pricked up when you, what a wonderful currency, the ship's biscuits. As Leonie points out, it's interesting that they were so highly prized by Menang people, because there are many accounts of First Nations people spitting them out in disgust. And I vaguely recall, and I think it was a Menang man who, down round King George Sound, ate so many ship's biscuits that his tummy swelled, and he laid on the beach because he'd sort of eaten lots of these ship's biscuits, and then he drank lots of water, and you can imagine they swelled up in his tummy. And he just lay on the beach for quite some time. It's in one of the early sealers' accounts.
Yeah. We actually as part of the Yulman project, that Yulman exhibition we did, we recreated and made several batches of ship's biscuits, and they were disgusting.
They are disgusting.
Not so mouldy, which made me worried over the 3 months that they were sat there. They were incredibly hard, tough, salty, and awful. But I wonder if maybe Menang people were breaking them up and including them, or mixing them with other products to make something more palatable, or eke it out, eke a meal out. So I wonder if they were innovating with it. I put my money on it, they were. Ariana Lambridis has asked the question, I wonder if the types of spears used could be determined by looking at the shapes and sizes of the puncture wounds that are visible on the fish, and potentially the stitching might make that difficult. But I'm assuming if it was, for example, a multi-pronged fish, you might get more than one puncture wound. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't had a chance to really study the fish specimens in detail. I'm the only one who's had a look at them very briefly when I was there. But Neil also did sketch a couple of the spear heads in his manuscript notes for particular fish that were caught. So we had to kind of go through that closely and work with families about to kind of ascertain what spears might have been used. Yeah, and we can also look at the ethnographic collection that is in the National Museum of Scotland, because there were spears that were collected there by Neill from Menang Country, which might relate to fishing. So we're really at the very beginning stages of, you know, we can't wait to kind of get to the UK and start all the exciting work,
once the planet opens up again.
Yeah.
Heather Dalton's just asked, I wonder if they'd scattered the biscuits on the water as a lure to the fish. I think that's about all biscuits are worth. They're dreadful things. I had a question about Collie being buried next to his friend, and I wondered if you'd like to speculate a bit about that. That's indicates a very intimate relationship.
Yeah, I mean, in my perspective, I think they'd had this amazing relationship that chopped and changed, I think, as colonization continued. And, you know, they were going on long journeys together where Macquarie was showing him important areas, water, they were exchanging language words, etc. And I think, you know, I imagine life was pretty hard. I mean, for Alexander Collie, it was tough times in that place. And with him being, I believe he became quite unwell to the end, closer towards the end, and he was due to catch a ship back to the UK, back to Scotland, to his family, because he was literally on his deathbed. And so he returned to Perth, I think, and Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, and then that ship then went back to Albany, the port, and it was there that he realised he was too sick to return. And he asked, I guess, his colleagues for him to be buried with Macquarie, which was extremely unusual. Extremely unusual.
I mean, I would have to say I've not heard of that before.
No, which
very much worthy of writing up and exploring and thinking about, you know, kind of intimate friendships on the colonial frontier.
And do you know what I found really quite sad? Sorry, Tiffany, I didn't mean to speak.
No, you go.
Was that later other colonists decided that it was unacceptable for him to be buried with Macquarie, and they dug his remains up and took him out and then buried him in the colonial graveyard later. So they never stayed together, which I find incredibly sad, actually.
That definitely deserves at least an article or some sort of profile. I can see it. We watched
another project, Lynette.
Another project. There's always another project, I'm afraid. We watched a couple of beautiful animations yesterday. I could almost imagine an animation of Macquarie and Collie. Fantastic. Does anybody else have any questions? This was a beautiful presentation. Just delightful and such wonderful material. You don't often think of, as you well, you know, I did a bit of work on faunal collections myself, but it's just an interesting thing. You don't really think of faunal collections as being so picturesque, particularly, you know, fish.
Yeah, that's right. It's really rich, and we really, I guess, approaching this collection as a kind of biocultural collection, not just a natural history collection. And I guess one of our main focuses is to kind of unpack that framework and try and really rethink it. And I mean, the museum curators, you know, weren't aware of the kind of the vastness of the collection until we started prodding and poking, and connecting them across institutions is going to be vital, I think, as well. So thinking about this as a really rich collection in many ways, not just for the natural knowledge, but obviously the cultural knowledge as well.
I think it's terribly important that that in those cases we don't lose that kind of like the context, because it's once an object in a museum or a collection loses its context, then in a sense it's lost to us. But the idea that you can now sort of almost like cross-reference it. You know, it sits in the faunal collection, in the natural history or the science collection, but it also it connects across, you know, in this kind of, I guess, labyrinthine way. It's just wonderful stuff. I noticed Campbell McKnight's just asked the question, was Makare a professional informant given his association with Barker as well? I don't know if
Yeah, he certainly lived in Barker's hut as well as Colley's hut, lived very closely. Being a single man, he was able to do that, to live closely with other single men or unmarried men, and he lived in both of those men's huts, and it was certainly, yeah, informed both of those men, Barker and Colley, about his culture and community, and shed a lot of knowledge. And Barker's journal in particular records such rich conversations between him and Makare, yeah, which is, I think, really exciting. Colley does record a lot too, but Barker's journal is really incredibly rich for the knowledge that he records of those conversations. You really get a sense of Makare's personality.
Heather Dalton's reminding us that in Cooktown, even husbands and wives were buried in separate churchyards if they weren't of the same religion and or race. It's an important point to remember, of course.
Yeah.
Look, we're right on the time. If no one has a further comment or question, we are taking a 30-minute break now. I hope people can at least perhaps sorry, someone's just coming in, but they're coming in right at the wrong moment. So we're taking a 30-minute break now, and we will be back at 5:30 Melbourne time. So that's basically in half an hour. This is the first of our session of our half-hour breaks where we haven't had a video to show. But as I said before, the next break, we will be having a tour through the shipwrecks gallery at the Western Australian Museum with Karaili Suter. So that would be fantastic. Really looking forward to that. So I hope I'll see you all back. You use the same Zoom link. There's no need to opt out. You can just turn your camera off and mute yourself if you like. And we'll see you all back here in half an hour.
Thanks so much, Lynette. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Yeah.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Shona. That was just magnificent. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Great. Bye for now.
Great questions too.